state's population. This large number shows the potential impact Minnesota Green Step cities can have on the residents of Minnesota. Annual assessments of participating cities are done, and they are recognized for their continued effort towards sustainability and quality of life goals. Advancement through this program can highlight Roseville's leadership in the metropolitan area and also a reputation for continuing an excellent track record of citizen involvement. The main benefits that can be reaped through the implementation of these best practices would be the eligibility for various small grant awards. So here are some updates on Roseville's progress. Like I mentioned earlier, they're currently at step 2, achieving that in June 2015. 18 best practices in 5 categories, namely green buildings, sustainable land use, transportation and mobility, environmental management, economic and community development have been completed. There is pressure for Roseville to move to step 3 if it wants to remain a regional leader in environmental management, as neighboring cities, St. Anthony and Shawville, are already at step 5. In total, 6 cities in this state are at step 5. Roseville is also currently updating its 2030 comprehensive plan, which is the city's general guide for a range of topics, environmental protection being one of them. The best practices that Roseville needs to complete are best practice 11, living streets, best practice 15, sustainable purchasing, best practice 24, benchmarks and community engagement, and best practice 29, climate adaptation and resiliency. I will now let Kimberly talk more about them.
So the first priority for Roseville when we initially talked to them about their goals for the Green Steps program was to develop some recommendations for implementing a living street within Roseville. There are many benefits of living streets, some of them being reduced accidents and increased safety for pedestrians. It connects services that may otherwise be fragmented, and it can also increase the aesthetic value of an area. Part of this is to also adopt a complete streets policy, which could be included in the comprehensive plan and include language about include language about the living streets implementation. Our recommendation after evaluating Roseville is our recommendation for implementing a living street would be Victoria Street North from County Road B2 to County Road C. This fulfills some of the requirements and would really, implementing a living street there would really have high value for the residents of Roseville. There's frequent vehicle, transit, and pedestrian use, and the park connectivity and stormwater management could also be benefited by implementing a living streets. So the other 3 best practices that we were looking at were sustainable purchasing policy. Roseville has already implemented some general practices regarding sustainable purchasing. And to complete this best practice, we recommend formalizing that with a policy passed through the City Council. This can include provisions such as purchasing renewable energy for the city, as well as energy and water efficient appliances, post-consumer recycled paper, and printing from sustainable sources. As I said, some of these have already been done by the city. Passing a policy would simply formalize that and receive additional recognition. The next is to create a green team, which we recommend would be composed of city staff as well as community members. And this team would oversee continued progress in the Green Steps program, as well as provide a yearly report to City Council and the community about the progress in the program. And finally, the final best practice is climate adaptation strategies, including working with Ramsey County on implementing their hazard mitigation plan and incorporating that into the comprehensive plan, as well as focusing on vulnerable populations in the city. And we also recommended taking into account the recommendations of the right-of-way group and the tree canopy diversity group, because they have some recommendations that will contribute to the climate adaptation strategies of Roseville. Finally, we looked ahead at moving from step 3 to step 4, which involves reporting on several metrics from the city, and 7 of them are required by the program, 5 of which can be chosen from a list of options. And in our report and on our poster, we listed which 5 we think are the most feasible for Roseville to implement. So we thank you for your attention, and we can take any questions you have here or at our poster.
What makes a living street a living street?
So the question was about what are some of the qualities of a living street. One of them is increased vegetation. So there, such as in the median of the road, there can be some native vegetation, tall grasses, flowers, trees along the sidewalk areas, as well as including extra space for bike lanes and extra space for pedestrians.
And stormwater management too.
Yes, and stormwater management. All right.
Yep, thank you. And with that, the organics recycling group is the next.
Hi, we are the Organics Recycling Group. I am Taylor Patel.
I'm Amber Moore.
I'm Krista Garrett.
I'm Amy Bone.
I'm Leonardo Ronaldo.
So the city of Roseville came to us and asked us to conduct a feasibility study for the implementation of an organics recycling program. To clarify, organics recycling is the collection of organic materials such as vegetables or fruits for composting. This is desirable because it helps increase community sustainability by reducing the amount of food waste that is created by residents that goes to landfills. In addition to this, the state of Minnesota has also expressed desire in increasing organics recycling programs. Specifically, state legislator made the goal of recycling and composting 75% of solid waste by 2030. This prompted the MPCA and various counties, such as Ramsey County, to create organics recycling goals. And this led to the city of Roseville taking a proactive step in figuring out the feasibility of implementing an organics recycling program. So with this information and with this request, our group created the goal to provide a comprehensive analysis of organics recycling feasibility and a thorough evaluation of potential organics drop-off locations within the city of Roseville. Now, in order to do this, it required a lot of data collection. Specifically, our methods of data collection included primary and secondary data. Primary data included interviews with various county, municipality, and hauler personnel. It also included case studies with 5 different municipalities that have similar attributes to the city of Roseville. And it also included drop-off site evaluations of different locations within Roseville. And secondary data included document review of various city, state, and county reports.
All right, so our research unveiled a variety of findings. Through case studies, we examined 3 organics recycling programs to gain a better understanding of the characteristics of each one. So the programs we looked at were the drop-off locations, the Blue Bag program, and the curbside cart program. We found that a drop-off location is a site within the city that residents can commute to dispose of their organics recycling material. We also found that Ramsey County does provide financial incentives for Roseville to implement an organics recycling drop-off site within the city. In a Blue Bag program, residents would collect their organics recycling material in a special blue bag and then deposit that bag into their normal trash can. A hauler would then come and pick up the commingled trash and organics, and bring it to a transfer site where the organics would be sorted out. And finally, in a curbside cart program, the resident would receive a special cart specifically for organics recycling. They would collect their organics material in a certified compostable bag and then place that in the cart for curbside pickup. Through interviews, we found that education and outreach are crucial for maximizing resident participation and increasing the integrity of the organics recycling process. Educating residents on the importance of organics recycling, as well as on how to properly utilize organics recycling programs, can help reduce contamination and increase overall program participation and program interest. Many interviewees also stated that having incentives and a high level of convenience can also increase resident participation. So an example of an incentive is the kitchen pail that's shown here on the slide. This can be given to new program participants, and the kitchen pail actually makes it more exciting and convenient for residents and new participants to take part in organics recycling programs. And finally, as far as convenience goes, convenience can be further enhanced by reducing the commute to an organics recycling drop-off site. Many of our interviewees also expressed that implementing a curbside cart program is easiest if the city has an organized hauling structure. Under an organized hauling structure, the city is able to work with one hauler rather than many haulers, and they can also incorporate the organics recycling requirement right into the service contract. And finally, we looked at 3 locations within Roseville to assess their suitability as a future drop-off location within the city. So the 3 sites that we looked at were the Victoria Ball Fields, the Dale Street Soccer Fields, and the Leaf Recycling Center. And each one of these sites was evaluated based on 5 criteria, which included accessibility, safety, parking and traffic impacts, site characteristics, and walkability. The Victoria Ball Field scored the highest in these evaluations and was therefore recommended as the most suitable location for a future drop-off site. So based on these findings, we recommend that the City of Roseville implement organics recycling in an incremental fashion, starting first with co-sponsorship of an organics recycling drop-off site within the city, and then followed later by implementation of a convenient citywide curbside cart program. We also recommend that the City of Roseville utilize comprehensive education and outreach strategies, and this is just to ensure maximum resident participation and overall program success. So thanks for listening. If you guys have any questions, we can take a couple of those now. Sure.
In your discussions with our recycling contractor, did they indicate how, from a timing perspective, how far away a really feasible curbside program was?
So the question was asking about the timing and the feasibility. So we discussed implementing an organics curbside program with Eureka. And within Ramsey County, right now the only issue is lack of a transfer station. So until that transfer station has been in place, then we can go forward with that.
In recommending the Victoria site, did you look at other areas around the city or just Central Park?
Yeah, so we just focused on the 3 sites that were in the slide. So the Leaf Recycling Center, Dale Street Soccer Fields, and the Victoria Ball Fields, and they were all located in pretty close proximity to each other. All right, if there are no other questions at this time, we're just going to hand it over to Parks Assessment.
All right. Hello, everyone. We are the Park Asset Management Plan Group. I am Jack.
I'm Kate.
Jake.
Cassie.
Karsten.
And just to give you all a little introduction and some background to our project, we were working closely with Lonnie and Jim Taylor of the Parks and Rec Department here in Roseville with the goal of creating an evaluation protocol for Roseville's park system. Roseville currently has 32 parks, which makes it pretty large when compared to similar-sized cities within Minnesota. And with such an extensive park system, we wanted to be able to provide park staff with an evaluation protocol that would allow them to gain a comprehensive idea of all these parks and the individual assets at each site. And when we say assets, we mean things like baseball fields, basketball courts, bathroom facilities, playground equipment, And if park staff are able to compile this data easily, they can streamline things like maintenance schedules, when to repair certain things, when certain equipment might need replacement in the near future, and then what areas are doing fine and don't require additional resources at the time. So we went into this project with a few specific goals and objectives, the first being to expand the existing condition rating protocol and then field test and evaluate a new or expanded protocol, all while beta testing and comparing this system to some tools we found that other cities were using in their park assessments. And then we all kind of did it under our group vision of supporting Roseville and sustainably managing the parks for the enjoyment and use of residents for years to come. And we used two primary methods in our project, the first being site visits. So we took out evaluation protocols to 5 different parks, Autumn Grove, Applewood, Cottontail, and then 2 areas within the larger Central Park system, Lexington and Dale West. And while we were completing the evaluations, we were paying attention to 3 specific variables, the first being the time it took for each of us to complete the evaluation, the rating scale we're using for each asset, and then the actual condition of the asset at the site. We also did some document comparisons, so we found a few evaluation tools that other similar sized cities across the US were using, and we also actually found an Australian park evaluation system that gave us some cool insight. And one of the most important aspects we found when we were completing these evaluations was the actual rating method we were using. We decided on, or based off the evaluation that Jim gave us, we were using a 1 through 5 condition rating, 1 being the newest and best condition something could be in, and 5 being the poorest it could be in. And we want to just create uniformity across this evaluation. So if I was at Applewood and I was evaluating that slide, which has some gashes and holes along the plastic, and I decided that represented a 4, which just means that it has some significant impacts to usability, poor appearance, and should be put higher on a maintenance schedule, that if Kate was to come along with the same evaluation, she would also give that slide of 4. So just creating consistency across our evaluation was one of the key components.
So some of our findings, when we were visiting the parks, especially during our first time, we did miss some of the assets. And that is good to note, as you have others other than Jim or Lonnie going around and doing these assessments, that the updated maps for the parks would be very useful. So there are some publicly available online that do display each park and all of the assets. And if those are just updated for new park buildings and other new assets or updated assets, then that would allow for it to just be streamlined and make sure that everything is being checked and everything is being evaluated. As we were going, we noticed that we did need to make some changes to our original form. We use the same rating criteria, but just adjusting the form would be, we expanded the comment section because that meant a lot more than just giving it a number. Although the description for each number is very clear, just adding the comments allows everybody to be on the same page with it. Also, in many of the parks, there are multiples of the same assets, such as 2 basketball courts, a couple of baseball fields, and so just making room for that, and being able to distinguish between them, like baseball field A versus baseball field B, just making it clear which one you're talking about. Also, we were originally using paper forms, which were great. They're very inexpensive, they're easy to use, except for when you're outside and it's dirty and wet and windy, especially this fall it was very windy. And so they were a little bit difficult to work with. They do limit the amount of comments you can write. There's only so much space you can give someone for a box of comments. Also, it doesn't allow you to easily compile the information. Someone would have to go and enter it into an Excel sheet or some other sort of data collection. So, and in addition, we also, through our document comparison, we kind of come up with some other ideas that might be useful to consider adding, just as you're going around through the park. Things like sidewalks and trails, open and green space, just general cleanliness. And vandalism is something that we did encounter, which is very disappointing in Roseville, since I know the prides are a huge source of pride. And so just noting like things like graffiti, and then just on some other forms, just unattended dogs or things like that. So this is our final form that we created. And so as you can see, we have the assets listed, room for multiples, room for like the number, condition ranking, and then for comments. And then our another recommendation is we created a Google form. If you're not familiar with the suite of services that Google offers, just by having an email address, you can create a Google form which allows anybody with the link to fill out this form, so you can enter all of your information, and then it goes through step by step. You would go the volleyball courts, enter in the numbers, and entering your comments, there's even a spot to upload photos, which, you know, a photo is worth 1,000 words. So just by having that all in one spot would make this really streamlined and really easy. And also by using this technology, it eliminates the problems that we had with the paper forms. So just walking around with your phone or a tablet, it's not gonna blow away in the wind or get dirty. Our third recommendation is to just optimize the funding to the parks, prioritizing the maintenance based on the rating system, and also to promote resource distribution equally among the parks instead of focusing maybe on the most popular park, making sure that there is attention given to the smaller neighborhood parks that many families use daily, and it's just as important to them to have the smaller parks as equally updated as the larger parks.
All right, and with that, we thank you all, and if there's any questions, we can answer those now.
How long did it take you to make the Google form?
I specifically worked on the Google form. Once I created the initial language, and I was able, you're pretty easily able to like duplicate a question. So for volleyball courts, let's say I just created one question and then I just duplicated a couple times. And also it's pretty easy since all of the like athletic type of assets, they're all very similar in the wording. So I just copy that and add basketball courts, you know, instead of volleyball courts. And so actually once you kind of get the hang of it, it maybe only took 2 hours to complete this. Also, with my form, I am able to change the ownership of it. So I can send that over to Danielle and she can take a look at that and make adjustments as you see fit.
All right, well, thank you very much for your time. And Public Art and Wayfinding Group's up next.
All right, well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for coming this evening. We are the Public Art and Wayfinding Group, and I am Daniel.
I'm Gillian.
Monica?
Wesley. All right, so you may be thinking, Public Art and Wayfinding, what does that entail? Well, I'll tell you about wayfinding here really quick. Wayfinding is basically just any infrastructure that a community or some other entity has that is dedicated to directing people around. It can have an educational or community enrichment component to it as well.
And then on the other end of things, public art is any piece of art, whether stationary like a sculpture or a mural, or dynamic like a concert in a park or a theatrical performance on the sidewalk, whose purpose is to spark the imagination and stir conversation within the public sphere. Guiding our project this semester, we had a unified vision, which was to enhance the experience of Roseville's visitors and residents through a user-friendly and efficient navigation system that complements featured public artwork to bring diversity and attraction to the city. We also had a few goals that we were working towards, namely pinpointing the desires of Roseville, trying to understand exactly what it was that the city wanted from us during the course of this report, providing applicable information about public art and wayfinding to the city, and lastly, creating a comprehensive list of wayfinding and public art recommendations that the city can use going forward.
So we used a couple of different methods to acquire our data. Our primary method was interviews. We interviewed city officials from other communities who had public art and wayfinding infrastructure already implemented, as well as arts organizations and individuals engaged in public art. We also did research on some secondary sources such as trade publications and scientific papers. In both the interviews and the secondary sources, we were really looking for a lot of common themes and challenges that different communities and entities had encountered in implementing wayfinding and public art. And then we picked a couple of test sites to look at some options as far as implementation for the city of Roseville.
So some of the findings that we came up with on the public arts side of things, overwhelmingly we heard from communities that we spoke with that using a formal, mostly online toolkit was one of the things that helped them most of all when they were planning their own public arts program in their city. There's a number of different toolkits and there's a number of different websites where they can be found and organizations that stand behind them. And we can definitely go through more of that it's detailed in the report and then at the poster session as well. Communities also had a lot of success building their own public arts programs when public art was incorporated specifically into their city comprehensive plan. We also heard from many communities that incorporating public opinion about different public art, whether they be pieces themselves or larger programs, was incredibly important to the success and the strength of their public arts program. Public art is, as it says in the name, for the people, and if the people don't like it, they will definitely let you know. Lastly, we heard from many communities that a diversity of featured artists and pieces of artwork was essential to maintaining the health and integrity of the program.
All right, and for wayfinding, just like public art, we found across the board for our interviews that incorporating wayfinding infrastructure into the city plan was really essential to having a successful program. Cities found it really helpful to create kind of just like basically a committee that was responsible for the implementation, funding, all of those sorts of things. It takes a little bit of pressure off of the larger city infrastructure to have a focused committee focusing on those issues. Some of the main issues that cities generally encountered after they had started implementing their programs were continued sources of funding as the program was implemented, as well as design challenges. It was amazing how many cities had a lot of issues with picking designs. And so that comes to that last part, functional design. You really want to, from the outset, come up with a really easy to use, really understandable wayfinding design, because the whole point is to move people around and make it easy for people to get around the city. So our first recommendation is to create some opportunities for community feedback for wayfinding and public art. Since these are very much public infrastructure that the public is going to be interacting with, you really want to make sure that you're getting their feedback and their needs and desires. So you really want to understand the community preferences, and we found that some of the most effective ways for communities to get some feedback on that were through town hall meetings and surveys.
Our second recommendation centers around really championing the volunteer in all of this. When we spoke with Jamie Marshall at Friends of the Arts in St. Louis Park, he told us that basically the history of Friends of the Arts, it was founded over 2 decades ago by volunteers and had been running strong for the 2 decades since then. So using volunteers, creating a strong, diversified core of volunteers that can really target specific projects. One group could work on funding while another one reaches out to artists, so on and so forth. And then also using things like internships and just as another way to draw people from the community in and to target specific projects that the city would like to have completed.
And we'll skip to recommendation 5 in the interest of time. You can stop by the poster afterwards if you want to see some of our other recommendations. The 5th recommendation is to implement wayfinding in public art on small-scale test sites. We chose Acorn Park, Central Park, and Langton Lake Parks because they represent a good diversity of the park amenities and infrastructure that exist in Roseville, as well as a good diversity of different neighborhood types within the city. These are nice areas because they're high visibility, they're high use, and they provide an opportunity for the city to kind of test run wayfinding and public art infrastructure at a small scale, lower cost, low risk, and then when they find successful infrastructure, then it can be expanded citywide. Acorn is a really nice residential area. Central Park, of course, kind of the jewel of Roseville's park system. It has it's a major hub for people moving around the city, and Langton Lake Parks is an interesting one because it's in a very much a commercial area on the western side of town, and it doesn't have a lot of visibility right now. And so for visitors and guests coming into the city, finding ways to get them interested in that park infrastructure and get them over there is something that Roseville could definitely look into. So with that, we'll take your questions.
How much do you find the wayfinding and the art programs working hand in hand? How did they help each other?
I do know that there were some cities, some communities that very much were interested in really combining the public art and the wayfinding aspect. Using, if you have, like, for example, a wayfinding sign, finding interesting ways to incorporate that as an art structure too. So it's both artistically appealing as well as functional within the wayfinding. I think that for communities that really fuse those two together, that's often what they do, is they try to pursue really creative, interesting ways to present the wayfinding. So it is artistic as well as functional.
So you mentioned the St. Louis Park Arts Council. For the other communities that are implementing kind of wayfinding art and other public art, were there other creative sources of funding that you found were being utilized?
Okay, the question was there any other funding that's being utilized? What I found was that many organizations incorporate like community fundraising. This can involve churches, the libraries, promote a lot of funding. There's usually institutional grants from universities, public school systems, donations, sponsorships from different organizations that really want to get a public art program implemented.
Did you do any research in terms of the arts community and how many artists there are in Roseville might be able to participate in the public art program?
Yeah, actually, Cynthia Lee is here, and she is the Vice President of Arts Roseville, which is the newly reinstated version of, it was the Roseville Arts Council previously. So Arts Roseville is getting started up again. We spoke a few weeks ago about what that looks like, and a lot of those details are also in the report. But previous to that, there are a few public art pieces in and around Roseville. Specifically, there's a few in Central Park. So we kind of looked at those to see what Roseville already had going on, and then spoke to a number of different people just to see where we want to go in the future.
All right, well, thank you very much, folks. Stormwater pond assessment is up next.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Craig,
I'm Linda.
Tyrese?
And Tessa, Elizabeth.
and we are the Stormwater Pond Assessment Group. The goals for this project, first we wanted to develop a stormwater pond assessment sheet that is objective and easy for use by anyone. Our second goal was to inspect ponds by doing site inspections and make recommendations on these ponds that we inspected. And our third goal was to create a process to include Roseville residents' feedback when completing maintenance on the stormwater ponds throughout the city. So for the methods for this project, first, through discussions with Ryan Johnson and a literature review process, we developed the criteria on which we would assess the stormwater ponds. This literature review process also helped us gain further knowledge on the criteria that we selected and how they affect the functionality of stormwater ponds. The criteria we selected were vegetation, erosion, culverts, dredging needs, and iron-enhanced sand filter suitability. We then created the assessment tool and refined its structure and content through site inspections at 6 stormwater ponds located in the city of Roseville. These ponds were the Roselawn Pond, Applewood Pond, Alameda Pond, Fairview Pond, Lexington Pond, and Zimmerman Lake. Lastly, we created a survey card and a homeowner survey that the city of Roseville could use to gather feedback from its residents on various aspects of stormwater ponds and stormwater pond maintenance. Some of the findings of this project, first, as a broad finding, we found that all the stormwater ponds we visited could use some kind of maintenance to improve the functionality of the pond. To get into some more specific findings, we found inlets and outlets that were clogged with organic debris and trash. This can severely limit the inflow and outflow of water in the stormwater ponds. That's pictured there on the left. On the right is a picture of the Lexington pond that we visited. At this pond, we found turf grass mowed to the edge of the pond. This raises concern for erosion to occur. Turf grass does not have a deep, robust root system when it is grown in wet soil conditions, and wet soil conditions are commonly found around the stormwater ponds. Evidence for this can be seen if you look at the bank of the pond. It kind of bumps in and out, and it's a non-uniform structure bank. This is caused by erosion occurring at this pond. Turf grass also raises concern for increased nutrient loading into the ponds. Turf grass is normally mowed on a regular schedule, and grass clippings from the turf grass can wash into the pond, and these grass clippings normally contain phosphorus from fertilizers used on the turf grass. Turf grass also promotes geese activity along the shorelines of the ponds, and when you have a lot of geese activity along these ponds, the goose droppings can be washed into the water, and they're high in phosphorus. Evidence for this can be seen in this picture. There is a fall algal bloom occurring in this pond, and normally algal blooms only occur in the spring. At the ponds we visited, we also found bare soil. This causes a direct concern for erosion, as there's no vegetation at all that's in place to hold soil structure and prevent erosion from occurring. At the ponds that had woody vegetation along the shoreline, we also found buckthorn present. Buckthorn is an invasive species in Minnesota, and it can rapidly take over forest composition. If it's allowed to do this, it will ruin the biodiversity in these wooded areas along the stormwater ponds.
With our goals and findings in mind, our group came up with 3 different recommendations. So the first one being that the city of Roseville adopt and use the stormwater pond assessment sheet that we created. As you can see here, it is a 1-page back-to-back form, and it was designed to visually assess these ponds. Designed for easy use. Anyone at any level can complete this form. It also comes with a key just to make sure that we have a uniform voice when making these assessments. Kind of like Parks assessment mentioned, we want everyone to have the same voice. Like what I see is what Craig is going to see, basically. So that's what the key is for. And we made a few different versions of this, but we decided that having mostly checkboxes, yes or no's, and also comment sections on the many different pieces that Craig mentioned. So for example, you see surrounding land use, erosion, sedimentation, covert conditions. Those are just a few examples that we have on the pond assessment form. Our second recommendation is directly following the first recommendation. So if the city of Roseville goes out to a pond and sees that it does indeed need maintenance, something needs to be performed, something needs to be changed, then we would then the city of Roseville will then use the second recommendation to follow up. And this is essentially just to create a healthy dialogue between the city and its citizens. So to the left is a card that we designed. This will be sent out to citizens that live within 3 blocks of a stormwater pond that needs needs maintenance performed at. And this is just to gather their information, their data, what they think the pond should look like. To the right is an example question that we have on there. So just to assess what they know about the different riparian zones how that might influence water quality to that pond. So there's a few of those questions on there, and then at the very end, we also ask if they're interested in getting more involved with the city. So that is also another option. Our recommendation number 3 is for the city of Roseville to follow up with these after gathering the data, the initial assessment form, just to go back to the ponds and really make sure that everything's followed through. So perform those appropriate maintenance needs at these ponds to make sure that they can hold as much water as possible, that they're performing to their maximum capacity, because essentially that's making sure that the water quality here is terrific, and we obviously want that. So what is benefiting the city of Roseville also benefits all the communities downstream. So that's all very important, and those are our 3 recommendations. Now we'll take questions or comments.
I really like your citizen survey card. Did you try implementing that at all, or did you follow somebody else, another city that's doing this, or did you come up with this on your own?
The question was how we came up with the survey card. It was more or less something that we kind of came up with on our own. I created the survey card in Microsoft Publisher, and we kind of designed it to where you can edit it further. Like you can see where you'd insert the URL for an online survey. And we kind of had it, the idea in mind that it would be sent out in a utility bill, so it was a piece of mail that a resident would definitely be opening, and we kind of like chose the color scheme and whatnot to grab the attention of residents. Thank you very much for your time this evening, and next is the outreach group.
Hi everyone, my name is Bree.
I'm Jordanis.
I'm Bree. I'm Lauren.
To start off, I have sort of a silly question. Can I get a show of hands of everyone who has been on a lawn before? Everyone. Lawns are a very important part of American life and American culture. Yet, despite their importance, not many homeowners understand how to manage their lawn. And this ends up wasting time and money on lawn management, as well as reducing water quality. Because what we do on our lawns ends up in our water bodies through stormwater. So today we are presenting 3 recommendations Roseville could use to better communicate with their residents about lawn care, stormwater, and water quality.
So when we approached our project, we divided it into a step-by-step approach. So the first step is understanding the current level of community engagement within Roseville from residents. And the second step was designing an outreach method and strategies template around a topic that's accessible. This is why we chose the stormwater management. This outreach approach can be implemented by Roseville in the future for other natural resource outreach work. This is just a template. And the third, we looked into creating a flexible toolkit for outreach strategies that can be designed and implemented, like I said. And throughout our approach, we were keeping in mind increasing resident comprehension of resources available in Roseville, because when Roseville tasked us at first, rebranding was a very important issue to the residents.
So to learn more about communication and outreach, we interviewed experts and professionals in the field, including watershed districts in the area, as well as city officials in the metro area and faculty at the University of Minnesota. And we also consulted the literature to incorporate research to support our findings, which is not on our presentation, but if you stop by our poster, we'd be happy to tell you more about our findings.
So our first recommendation is partnership. So partnership with watershed districts and Blue Thumb. Roseville has partnered with other watersheds before in the past, but it's been mostly on green infrastructure. So we divided the watershed districts into an informal process of partnership, and then the Blue Thumb into a formal process. So the reason it's an informal process is because of it would just be an informal meeting with the watershed. And I have talked to specifically to Capitol and Ramsey, Washington, and they are a phone call away. And then for Blue Thumb, it's a formal, that's actually the form right there, and it's filling out a form, and this would give Roseville access and creation of educational material. Roseville doesn't have to invent the wheels, they basically would have project assistance.
Our second recommendation is that Roseville promote and support community engagement programs within their community. We have identified 3 programs that we think would be a good fit, including a water steward program and 2 citizen science programs. And we are recommending these for 3 reasons. The first is that residents will be much more knowledgeable about stormwater issues and lawn care if they are participating in programs and if they are engaged in these issues. Second is that these programs create a network and community of citizens who are concerned about stormwater. And third, Roseville is not trying to educate their residents about stormwater and lawn care in case it's the next trivia night topic, right? Roseville is looking to improve the quality of their citizens' lives through better lawns, cleaner stormwater, and improved water quality. So to increase any behavior change in residents, which incorporates these best management practices in their own lawns, participation and engagement are the best methods.
Our third and last recommendation is a multifaceted outreach tool. The reason so we have heard this from like literature reviews that we have reviewed, and then also from the interviews, the countless interviews, specifically with Capitol Watershed and Ramsey Washington Metro Watershed. It was emphasized to, like during the interviews, that consistency and also adaptability to new outreach methods is very important. So kind of presenting these natural resource topics in a compelling way. So that could be through social media or just even a pamphlet that is appealing to Roseville. And that's something that has been emphasized throughout and that we have been keeping in mind. And it could also give that rebranding component that we talked about before. And with that, we'll take any questions you have. Yes?
So I'm a little surprised that you didn't have a recommendation that would include residents reducing the amount of sod that they have, or reducing lawns, period. I'm sort of the camp that says a green lawn is almost immoral. And there's certainly other things that we can do to reduce the amount of sod that are in lawns, in yards. So I was a little surprised not to see something like that. And also water usage on lawns, a better way to incentivize citizens to reduce the amount of water they're throwing on their lawns.
So within the water stewardship program that we're recommending, there would be actionable steps that would outline how to do that and how to decrease your lawn clippings that are going into the storm drain. And there's actually a program called Adopt a Drain that lays out simple steps that homeowners can take to go about simply reducing their impact on water quality.
And throughout our project, we kind of had 2 sort of research topics. One was, how does Roseville communicate better with their residents? And then the other half was, well, what should they tell them? Which is what you were talking about, what can residents do? And we didn't really include that other half of what we are recommending the residents actually change their behavior. But if you're interested in learning more about that, we do have information on our poster afterward.
Okay. And with that, we'll hand it to the next group, the Natural Resource Restoration Program group.
All right, good evening. We are the Natural Restoration Group, and I am Mary Fitzgerald.
I'm Yasmin Sad.
I'm Allison Bai.
I'm Ian Vaughn.
Anastasia Shimkus.
And so this project is focused on improving Roseville's natural resource restoration volunteer program. After speaking with Roseville staff, we established two main goals that are inclusive of Roseville's values. The first is to develop a sustainable volunteer program that includes educational programming and allows volunteers to work on projects on their own time. And the second is to increase youth and college-aged involvement through local communities, which is expected to mend current demographic gaps that we've noticed. The methods used to determine the best recommendations to achieve these goals and to help us understand volunteer programming in general include interviews, literature reviews, observations, and event participation. Interviews were conducted by contacting staff members of surrounding cities, and we used open-ended questions during these interviews to allow new ideas to be presented and for us to learn of aspects of volunteerism that we may not have considered before or been aware of. And for our literature reviews, we utilized scholarly journals and city documents to learn about volunteer retention, the service enterprise standard that Roseville has adopted, and Roseville's own goals and values in general as well. And lastly, attending a seed collection event allowed us to observe the different aspects of Roseville's volunteer program in practice rather than analyzing the program based on theory.
All right, so with our methods, we came up with 5 primary findings. The first finding is that Roseville volunteers want independence. So we found that volunteers do enjoy working in a group, but there are certain volunteers that would love to go out on a weekday and work on their own and work on an independent project. Our second finding is that volunteer safety protocol training is essential when independent volunteers exist. So with this new finding that volunteers want independence, there needs to be some sort of protocol in place to make sure that no one gets hurt and it's a safe situation for everyone involved. Our third finding is that educational programming is efficient and crucial for motivating volunteers. This education just really motivates volunteers. They know what they're doing and why they're doing it, and it kind of sparks volunteers to have an interest in what exactly is buckthorn and why are they pulling it out of the ground. Our fourth finding is citizen science engages everybody, especially youth participants. Through our observations, we did find that there is sort of a lack of youth participating in the volunteer programs, so we'd love to get them involved to make this a sustainable volunteer program for many years to come. And our fifth finding is that logistics of a volunteer program are crucial for attendance and retention. This can be anything from the day of the week the volunteer program is at, what time it's at, and if there are refreshments provided. All right, so with these findings, we did create 4 recommendations. The first recommendation is to establish a citizen science program and community education events. The second recommendation is to partner with the UMN Community Engagement Scholars Program. This program allows Roseville to post their volunteer program on the website database, which will open it up to a huge crowd of people that are looking for somewhere to volunteer in the area. And so with that, we do have another recommendation to implement liability checklist and ID card for independent volunteer projects. With this new surge of volunteers, we do expect that there are some that may want to work independently. So with this new independence, a liability checklist would be a simple form that they fill out before they volunteer so that they're safe and having fun as well. This checklist includes having a safety vest, a charged cell phone, checking in with a city staff member to where they'll be working and what type of work is being conducted, as well as many more parts of the sheet that we can talk about later at our poster. And then our fourth recommendation is to hire a seasonal natural resource volunteer coordination intern. With all these recommendations, we don't expect the city staff members to put all this extra work on their backs, so we do find that a seasonal intern would be a great way to distribute this work and get more youth involved in the program as well. So, in conclusion, we do, through our research, we found that Roseville has a ton of volunteers that have a lot of passion for their city, and they work really hard, and the city relies on the hard work of their volunteers. And we do want to give a little shout out. If anyone has gotten a new spark of interest to volunteer, you can contact one of us here or the city staff members that you are sitting next to. So we thank you for your time. We know this is kind of a Wednesday night and you came here on your own free will, so we do appreciate you sitting through all of these, and we will take questions if you have any at this time. All right, so all of us will be standing out next to our posters, but to conclude the night, Ian has a little conclusion for us.
All right, well, thanks for hanging in there tonight with us, folks. It's really appreciated. But this evening, you've heard from 9 different task groups with topics ranging from parks asset management to green step cities. We all are incredibly grateful to have worked with the City of Roseville, including city staff and the many residents who have helped us along the way. And if you found any of these topics particularly interesting, contact the city and let them know that you support those efforts. But now, please join us in the foyer for the poster session and a more detailed discussion on any questions that you may have.
I have a question. Before everybody disperses, I'm really curious how the individual teams got on each of the projects. Did they get to choose it? Was it assigned?
Do you want me to field this question, Gary? So before the class started, we were all asked to send an email to our professors on, our interests and our past history, say work or what we enjoy doing, and then under their discretion, they put us in these groups.
I think you all did just a phenomenal job. Very interesting.